Stabat Mater is a Latin phrase which means mother stands, or the mother, stood, was standing. So it's kind of like a past tense. So it's to do with a mother, and it's to do with the idea of standing somewhere. It's the name of a kind of like a hymnal or a prayer. I've actually put that in the document here, so if you want to read through the hymn, it's a very ancient hymn to the Virgin Mary, and it's quite interesting. So I've actually just put the whole hymn there if you wanted to read it and cross-reference it with the poem. I've spent quite a long time thinking about the connections between this hymn and the poem that Sam Hunt wrote. It's quite interesting. There's like some kind of interesting sort of crossover of imagery or theme. So this idea of, the continual suffering of a mother, the suffering of a son as well, and the death of a son, and the idea of grief and mourning. So in this poem in particular, Sam Hunt himself, because it's autobiographical, he's the son, and he's kind of giving a portrayal of his own mother and her relationship with her father. So you can see the opening here. My mother called my father Mr. Hunt for the first few years of married life. I learned this from a book she'd inscribed to dear Mr. Hunt from his loving wife. So we're immediately hit with the portrayal of a kind of unusual family dynamic, a hyper-formal family dynamic where the mother and the father are kind of somewhat estranged, and it seems almost like a professional agreement that they've come to get married. Instead of there being true affection and love, they're not calling one another by their first names. The mother has a sense of distance and formality when it comes to the father. And the poem progresses that way. So I want you to just read the poem aloud to yourself. I can't hear just because of copyright, but you can read it in your book or wherever you have the poem. Read it aloud and think about the dynamic. So there's three people. There's the mother, who's the main subject of the poem, the father, who is her husband and their strange relationship, and then also the son, who's the speaker of the poem, the person who's the voice, and his experience of both of them, the mother and the father. There's quite a lot of interesting tensions and connections going on there. As you read through, you might want to highlight or underline some of those and think about them more deeply. And then when you're ready, we'll move on to the story. So the mother is kind of embarrassed by the idea that she's, so formal with her husband, especially the fact that the son has picked up on it. And, he's very old, so it's very difficult for her, because of the age difference, to call him anything but Mr. Hunt. She says that he's older than her own father even. So it's a strange family dynamic where we have this kind of giant age gap. There's no real direct comment necessarily on whether that's appropriate or inappropriate. It's definitely unusual and irregular to have a husband who's older than your own father. But there's nothing, in that to say that it couldn't be a loving relationship. This particular one, though, there feels like there's a genuine sense of distance, and it's very difficult for the mother to connect to the father because of the age gap and the generational differences, and the relationship as they mature becomes quite strange as well. So, she's still like a girl now. We assume that the poet's grown up at this point, but in a different way, she calls his father, lots of other names. So the speaker's father, her husband, and guides him in his old age. She sometimes turns and looks at me as if it were a game. It's a curious relationship. The father being so much older. It feels definitely, I think, that the speaker is much closer to his mother than his father as well. So has kind of, compassion and understanding for his mother. And his father seems so distant in this poem. But I did read actually that Sam Hunt writes some quite decent, nice poetry about his father too. So if you're interested in this curious family dynamic that they have, you can read a few more Sam Hunt poems and see, what he says about his father in other places. But definitely this poem is centrally focused around the mother, as you can see also from the title. So yeah, some interesting stuff about him. He's a New Zealand poet, born in 1946. He likes performance poetry, so this poem and all his other ones, they're meant to be read aloud. They need to be, almost performed, like spoken in a kind of theatrical way. And his father was 60 and his mother was 30 when he was born. So there's a 30-year age gap. He did sort of struggle at school. He had trouble, I think, as a teenager. Never really settled down. Did a lot of random jobs, like being a truck driver. And then decided, that he's going to dedicate himself to poetry. It's quite an interesting career trajectory, quite strange, unusual change in career there, but I respect that a lot. And you do, for some reason, get that trajectory in quite a lot of New Zealand poets. I remember there was a poet, James Baxter, that I teach sometimes. He does a similar type thing. He has this kind of very physical jobs and then becomes a poet. So yeah, I don't know if it's something about New Zealand culture that encourages that. It's quite interesting. So yeah, it's an autobiographical poem. It's about his own parents. It's about an unusual family dynamic. It's about the mother's perspective and sense of formality and difference, the shifting nature of their relationship, the unusual way that, she becomes a kind of carer for him in old age as well. But it's interesting, they stay together and, they seem happy with that situation too, that, love doesn't, everyone's sort of view of what love is or different types of love, it's quite personal. It seems to be a kind of affection there. It's not like the mother hates her job and, refuses to look after him or divorces him for his money or anything like that. So yeah, it's a very curious situation. So yeah, the speaker has this affection for his mother and a bit of distance from the father in this particular poem. The mother takes marriage seriously as if it's a job almost, like it's a duty. She works hard to be a good wife. She's not ever complaining. It doesn't really mention other children or not, so you don't know if she's kind of super motherly or if most of her attention is actually focused on her husband. There's a lot of interesting language here, some of it based around that performance context. So the easygoing conversational style, the natural speech, that type of thing is very much, in keeping with the performative nature of the poem. It's a lot of interesting terms of address. So Mr. Hunt, these possessive pronouns, my is repeated to emphasize that the speaker has this personal connection. Her father's elder is a really strange phrase that is a little bit, I think, anachronistic or archaic. Doesn't quite fit with the natural speech, so I think it's meant to stand out. And this simile, still like a girl, like there's a sense of, because she's with such an older man, she kind of is always in a state of youth almost. Like that's the kind of positive of being with him. That, the father ages considerably, but it feels like the mother doesn't age, that she's still got the same energy and the same character the whole way through. So yeah, this is the whole hymn. Because it's a hymn, you could even listen to it if you were that interested and really wanted to go deep into this poem. It's a lot more religious than the poem, but it does have the same sorts of themes of mother and son and their closeness, their relationship, suffering, difficulty, and so on. So yeah, you definitely could spend some time picking that apart if you were interested in doing so. So yeah, there's some interesting attitudes as well. You might want to pause and write down what you think the meaning or the message of the poem is. There's quite a lot of different ways you could take it. You could actually be kind of harsh about the father, or you could be quite supportive. You could feel like, the mother's a victim and she's trapped, or actually that she enjoys her life and chooses that actively as a, conscious role. You could think that the poet is kind of messed up from his strange family dynamic, or that he's actually appreciative of coming from an unusual family because he does seem really close to his mum. There's a lot of different angles and perspectives that you could take on the poem, so you can have a look and think about your own opinions as well. I've given you a couple of mine here. So yeah, if you have time, I recommend to do a few exercises as well. With the themes, you can always do things like find quotes that relate to each theme, or try and find the ultimate message about each theme. That's always a good one to do. And then you can try these little exercises too. When you're ready, you can also try an essay question. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you found this an interesting poem. It's very thought-provoking, I think. It's kind of curious without being too serious. If you need any more help with video lessons or downloadable documents or anything like that, you can also go to scribbly.com, because we have lots more stuff like that on there. If this is a Cambridge poem that you're doing for the Cambridge exam, there's a full course as well on there for Cambridge poems. So yeah, thank you for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you guys soon.